Ave Regina, Mater misericordiae, vita dulcedo, estes nostra salve.
The Lord be with you.
And with your spirit.
A reading from the Holy Gospel according to St. Matthew.
Glory to you, O Lord.
Jesus again, in reply, spoke to the chief priests and elders of the people in parables, saying, "The kingdom of heaven may be likened to a king who gave a wedding feast for his son. He dispatched his servants to summon the invited guests to the feast, but they refused to come. A second time, he sent other servants, saying, 'Tell those invited, behold, I have prepared my banquet. My calves and fattened cattle are killed, and everything is ready. Come to the feast.' Some ignored the invitation and went away, one to his farm, another to his business. The rest laid hold of his servants, mistreated them, and killed them. The king was enraged and sent his troops, destroyed those murderers, and burned their city. Then he said to his servants, 'The feast is ready, but those who were invited were not worthy to come. Go out, therefore, into the main roads and invite to the feast whomever you find.' The servants went out into the streets and gathered all they found, bad and good alike, and the hall was filled with guests. But when the king came in to meet the guests, he saw a man there not dressed in a wedding garment. The king said to him, 'My friend, how is it that you came in here without a wedding garment?' But he was reduced to silence. Then the king said to his attendants, 'Bind his hands and feet and cast him into the darkness outside, where there will be wailing and grinding of teeth. Many are invited, but few are chosen.'" The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
President Thomas Jefferson wrote, "The price of freedom is eternal vigilance." The parable of the wedding feast reminds us we must always be vigilant, to be ready for the invitation of the King. What was the attitude of those invited in today's parable? Some ignored the invitation. They were indifferent. One went to his farm, another went to his business, and the rest, we are told, laid hold of the king's servants, mistreated them, and killed them. We are plagued in our country with both of these attitudes. Hard to believe that we have a lot of indifference with so much that has happened to our country in just the last year. And we just can pray, hopefully some are waking up. We also find a lot of anger and violence to the invitation of the gospel message. Some priests, bishops, some religious and catechists, some Christians from other denominations have preached or taught a message of false mercy, of promoting and encouraging what once used to be considered sins and wrong moral behavior as a good, some even calling it holy and from God. I think they believe they are speaking God's invitation, but they are speaking lies and slavery. This has caused great confusion in our culture, especially for our young people. Now, if someone speaks the truth, there is great anger and at times retaliation. My brothers and sisters, how can people be brought to freedom? How can they be healed if we cannot speak the truth? More and more laws are keeping us from speaking freedom. St. John Paul II warned us in the early 1990s in an encyclical called Veritatis Splendor, the splendor of truth. And one of the main teachings of his was you cannot separate freedom from the truth. The truth shall set us free, right from the gospel. Many movements and philosophies, false prophets have taught freedom is choosing what is right for you. Yes, you can freely choose what you want. God has given us free will. But what they don't warn you is that those choices have consequences. What begins as someone really believing they have freedom turns to slavery and bondage. How many have said, I can do with my body what I want, and within days, weeks, months, find they are not free to do what they want with their body. They are now in bondage. They are slaves to their body. The amount and kinds of addictions are staggering. An author, John Fagan, has put John Paul's teachings into summaries, and I would like to read the following. And this is based on Veritatis Splendor. The Holy Father next addresses the tension between obedience to God's law and the modern notion of freedom. Morality refers to the good and evil of human acts and of the person who performs them. In modern thought, freedom is often exalted to the point of being an absolute. This individualist ethic, however, is inconsistent with man's condition as a creature subject to limitations. And in quote, the power to decide what is good and evil does not belong to man, but to God alone. End quote. Authentic freedom consists in choosing the good and living in accordance with the truth of one's nature. There is no conflict between freedom and natural law because such law has God as its author. Quote, God's law does not reduce, much less do away with human freedom. Rather, it protects it and promotes that freedom. Now, someone may ask, if Jesus is my only choice, isn't that limiting my freedom? Absolutely not. Because when we choose Jesus, when we answer his invitation, we are transfigured and transformed by grace. He created us, so we become more and more whom we are meant to be. Choosing other idols and gods dehumanizes us. It disfigures our human dignity. The one God and his commandments and ways is where we become truly free. Choosing any other way brings slavery, bondage, and death. The people Jesus are describing in the parable reject the invitation because they believe answering the invitation to other things is going to bring them greater happiness and freedom. Others reject the invitation because they believe something is being imposed upon them, or the king is taking their freedom away. They react with violence by beating and killing the servants. And what is the consequence in the parable? The king was enraged and sent his troops, destroyed these murderers, and burned their city. Jesus points out in the parable that being defiant to the invitation has consequences, consequences we really impose upon ourselves. When I was newly ordained in Exeter, St. Michael's, we would go to the hospital very often. And it was before all the HIPAA laws, so we had a lot more freedom in talking with people. And I had this experience within a week or two of each other. I went into the hospital and a nurse was telling me about an incredible miracle. This guy who should have died, they can't understand what happened. All of a sudden, he is fine. And I went into his room to talk with him, and I said, what a wonderful thing. I said, that's so great that you've been healed. What a great miracle. And he looked at me and said, miracle nothing, it's called science. And using your mind over matter. And I said to him, so you don't think God had anything to do with this? Absolutely not. And I said, well, can I at least pray with you? He said, no. He said, just leave. You take your religion with you. I walked away astonished. This guy had cancer, was going to die, and could not, that invitation by God, and he couldn't see it. Within a week or two, I was doing my rounds and I was praying with someone. There were two people in the room. And as I finished, this guy said, hey, Father, could you come over to see me? And I said, sure. He wasn't on my list. And I said, how can I help you? He said, well, do you think you can pray with me? I said, well, of course I can. He said, well, I was Catholic, and I've been away from the church for a while. I said, well, how long? I can't remember the exact, I think it was 67 years he was away from the church. He was in his 90s. And I was astonished because I was only 32. And I'm like, wow, he's been away longer, almost twice as much as I've been alive. It was amazing. And I talked with him, and there was nothing from keeping him from the sacraments. I heard his confession. I gave him the Eucharist. He had not been confirmed. I confirmed him because I can do that in an emergency. He was radiating. I left. When I came back the following week, one of the nurses told me he had died within an hour after I left. Amazing experiences. Here's a guy, the first one who had a miracle, and yet he could not hear the invitation of the merciful Father. And then we have this guy, he heard the invitation of the merciful Father of Jesus Christ for me speaking and praying with someone else. And it moved his heart. Maybe that invitation is for me. And I think that day he entered a great banquet. Brothers and sisters, we are living in times of the lie, false mercy, and slavery that calls itself freedom. Our country has some philosophies that are very dangerous. It takes God and Christianity completely out of the picture. This is already causing dehumanization and attack on the dignity of the human person. It makes humans objects and products. St. John Paul II reminds us that freedom cannot be separated from truth, from God and his ways and commandments. When it does, there is only chaos, darkness, and violence. The parable reminds us that in salvation history, in the Bible, is filled from Adam and Eve through Revelation with many invitations to follow him. He never stops inviting us. And those who answer the invitation experience the great banquet. And they experience love, healing, peace, freedom, joy, and complete confidence in the merciful Father who loves them. I'll end this morning with a powerful quote from Deuteronomy chapter 30, verse 15 to 20. See, I have set before you this day life and good, death and evil. If you obey the commandments of the Lord your God, which I command you this day, by loving the Lord your God, by walking in his ways, and by keeping his commandments and statutes and his ordinances, then you shall live and multiply, and the Lord your God will bless you in the land which you are entering to take possession of it. But if your heart turns away and you will not hear, but are drawn away to worship other gods and serve them, I declare this to you this day, that you will perish. You shall not live long in the land which you are going over the Jordan to enter and possess. I call heaven and earth to witness against you this day, and I have set before you life and death, blessing and curse. Therefore, choose life, that you and your descendants may live, loving the Lord your God, obeying his voice and clinging to him. For that means life to you and length of days, that you may dwell in the land which the Lord swore to your fathers, to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob, to give them.
Regina Celi, letare, alleluia, quiaque merum isti portare, alleluia, resurrecti